Benjamin Netanyahu is saying everyone will have to provide answers, but the time is not now. The time now is on making sure that Israel remains, that Israel can exist.
This was the most non-apology apology and the most non-mea culpa imaginable. I mean, one official after another, anyone who had anything to do with this catastrophe, comes out in the past weeks and says clearly, I bear responsibility. What I'll do with that, whether I'll resign or not, is a whole separate question, but they don't deny they bear responsibility. Now we hear the Prime Minister, who is more than anyone the author of the idea that it's pretty cool to have a terrorist group running Gaza because that weakens the moderate Palestinian Authority and makes it less likely that Israel will be corralled into a two-state process. That was his idea. I didn't hear any taking of responsibility. I heard him say that we must check what happened and everyone will answer questions, and I also will answer questions. So thank you very much. But this is not anything resembling a taking of responsibility, and for it to be treated as such, I have to say, is the soft bigotry of low expectations. That Netanyahu lives on a whole other planet where responsibility takes entirely other forms than it does for mere mortals.
After what happened on the 7th of October, Israel's duty, our duty, is to bring all of this group back home because they are civilians or soldiers, but they are as a result of the failure of those who are well responsible for the security of Israel from the military point and from the political point, and we have to bring them as soon as possible back home.
Dan, Qatar finances Hamas. Qatar hosts Hamas, and yet potentially these are the brokers that may make a difference. Your take?
It's absurd. I watch the world sometimes in utter stupefaction, honestly. When abnormal things become normal, when unacceptable becomes acceptable, the world has some leverage over Qatar. Qatar wants to be accepted as a member in good standing of the community of civilized nations. They host the World Cup. They pretend to be a normative country. I would hope that if the world wanted to do something useful, the West, they would apply maximal pressure on Qatar with a carrot as well as a stick. That they can do that. They can maybe get the Sunni world to stop being a little bit nasty towards Qatar. For a while there, they were totally ostracized by Saudi Arabia and other countries in exchange for understanding that it is no longer acceptable in any way, shape, or form to support Hamas. I would absolutely make it a global goal of Israel's. Maybe even before blundering into Gaza with tanks rumbling, to completely isolate Hamas, to punish any country, any organization, any individual that provides sanctuary for, funding for, assistance for, or even negotiation with Hamas. After what happened on October 7th, Hamas needs to be removed from the rank of organizations that one can deal with and not expect to be a pariah oneself.
Well, to that exact point, what then do you make of Recep Tayyip Erdogan saying Hamas is not a terrorist organization? One wonders how he would define the PKK right now, but that we can park for the moment.
Surprised?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is the guy who's happy to call any Kurd in Turkey a terrorist, practically.
Well, let's be honest, there were efforts at some kind of warming of relations between Israel and Turkey. He was supposed to be visiting soon. He's obviously cancelled that, as we know.
He is speaking, and we know the guy. We know it. He will come back to the circle and will climb up and will move around the circle. But the main problem is Qatar. Let's not play the games. Qatar built this kind of murder organization by cheating Israel and find a way of cooperation inside Israel from the fact of coming inside, do Israel, bring the money, creating a situation recently like a very nice sunshine with empty clouds, but above it was a darkness. They continued the sponsored, but now we need them. We need them to bring back the hostages and the life of the people that are now in tunnels inside Gaza is the responsibility of Qatar as the same of Hamas.
Sounds like we agree on Qatar. As for Turkey, the answer may be more in the realm of the psychological than the political.
Your thoughts on Antonio Guterres and his comments, fallout, walking it back, but not really walking it back, What do you see into this?
He's a creature of his environment, which is the UN, and indeed Israel. The Israeli narrative, to use a word I hate, is not that popular in a General Assembly. He's more the head of the General Assembly than the head of the Security Council. When he says that the attack didn't happen in a vacuum, to an extent, that's always true. It's true of all things. Nothing happens in a vacuum. But of course, you have to be spectacularly tone deaf to say that in the context of your first public statements about a massacre of 1,400 people. It's going to sound like you're being an apologist for it. So it would be a little bit sad for poor Guterres if he had reached his advanced years and hadn't figured that out.
If you saw the brutality, if you saw the depravity that was filmed by Hamas when this rampage happened, a human being cannot be anything but outraged.
Of course. Obviously. But here's the problem with that, okay? When Israel carries out reprisals in Gaza, actions in Gaza, when it bombards Gaza knowing that there are human shields and that those human shields may die, that creates terrible scenes in Gaza. And I think if Israel assumes that people will compare the two things, human shields dying at Israel's hand because Israel had no choice but to do the bombardment, versus maniacal terrorists, probably drugged up to boot, running around southern Israel, raping and pillaging, they're going to know the latter is worse. I think Israel may be disappointed, because there is this endless loop of constant death and destruction that causes many people to be confused about who is right and who is wrong.
I must say something about the UN Secretary. Give me 10 seconds. Shame for him, shame for the General Assembly, and shame from the free world. And I think this guy should be removed from his job, and I'm serious.
How, Eitan, did Israel not see this coming? How did
and
Israel
fail to react for 4 hours, 5 hours?
miss?
I mean, and let them drag people back into Gaza unmolested. What on
Training
earth?
camps were apparently set up just across that border. The
Videos.
intelligence failure here, when you listen to a young woman like that waiting for word on her grandparents, talking about the relationship that they have. How did this happen?
I really cannot give you the answer how everything among the way it should be stopped in places where it should be stopped. And we have press signs from the intelligence and from the operation and from all the discussions. And when you see the atmosphere, I think we will have to dig it very deep and for time to study from it a very tragic lessons. Now it's time to leave it on the side, and now it's time to make what we have to do with Hamas, and later we have to see it and do it very deeply and intensively.
Dan.
You know, I have to say, sure, that sounds good, Eitan, obviously. But we know very well who we're dealing with on the political side in Israel. If they prolong the war in one way or another, don't declare it over for a year or so, it is very clear that the hope will be that by then everything will be confused and there will be a whole new reality, and those responsible will more or less be allowed to get away with it. I think whereas some things are very complicated, in some ways it's also very simple. Israel, over the past year, more or less joined a global bandwagon that was predicted in the movie Idiocracy. And the idea was that you can elect incompetents and fools, and everything will somehow be okay. And I think the piper was paid on October 7th. We had incompetence, and it is not okay.
I think that the goalkeeper is the Israeli nation. Israeli nation is now fighting thousands of people for the future of their families and the future generations. And they will not give any politician and anyone who was involved in this case to find a way to escape from this fact.
Eitan Dangart, Dan Perry, thank you both very much for being here.